Srila Prabhupada, our founder Acharya. There, Srila Prabhupada, he's at Bhaktivedanta Manor in the UK, and he appears to be accepting some kind of toy from this little girl. In lesson 2, we examined the founder Acharya principle, its origin, and historical development. In this lesson, we'll look at our own founder Acharya, Srila Prabhupada, and how he realized and revealed his position as service to his Guru Maharaj, to Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and to all generations of his followers. So that shot was taken in 1973, 42 years ago. Now the girl appears to be, what, maybe 5 years old or something like that. So 42 plus 5. So if she's still with us in this life, she's in her late 40s. And the reason I put it up there is a reminder that this little girl, now if she's still alive in this body, although she is not Prabhupada's initiated disciple, she has just as much opportunity to have a foundational relationship with Prabhupada, foundational Shiksha relationship, as does the lady in the background. The lady in the background is Srimati Hemavati Mataji, who I believe is still with us, yeah. So that's the whole point. A little girl can have just as much of a foundational Shiksha relationship as the initiated disciple in the background. And we are stressing this again and again because this is the unity that will carry us through the ravages of time. Because time always tries to, divide us and make some breaks and splits and factions. And we've already had that. So we don't need more of that. We need to keep Prabhupada in the center in an authentic way, not in some concocted way. Now when I do the full seminar, at this point I always ask the audience, we won't have to do it tonight, but I say, write down in 108 words or less your relationship with Srila Prabhupada. Right now. That's what I tell the students, And the reason we do that is because at the end of the journey of lesson 10, we take a look at what we wrote and see how the journey has affected our relationship with Prabhupada, hopefully for the better. And now, we're going to have some fun. We're going to look at some prophecies, both Puranic and Gaudiya, that Srila Prabhupada fulfilled. Okay, raise your hand if you can tell us where Prabhupada is in that image.
Tompkins Square Park.
It's either Tompkins Square Park, it probably is, or Washington Square Park, because they went to 2 parks when they started the movement in 1966 summer. Actually, they didn't start going to the parks until the fall. Yeah. But there's Prabhupada. What's Prabhupada playing? It's not a mridanga. There were no mridangas. Someone brought a little, what we in America we call it a tom-tom. It's a little Indian, Native American hand drum. And you hear him on the recordings playing it, And sometimes the jazz musicians in the park on the weekends, they would go to the park just to hear how Prabhupada would play that. Because even though it was like a toy almost, but Prabhupada would play it in this masterful way. One time a god sister of mine asked Prabhupada, because Prabhupada was at New Vrindavan in 1969, and he was just about to get a massage from his servant, and so he was sitting waiting for the person to get the oil on his hands. And so Prabhupada was playing his stomach like a drum. And it sounded like a drum. And so my god sister said, Srila Prabhupada, how did you learn how to do that? And Prabhupada said, practice. So Prabhupada was expert in so many ways. Okay, so who knows? Most people don't know this, but it's... can anybody tell us... You have a question? Oh, your hand kept going like that. At the end you can ask questions. Who knows? Anybody know a Puranic? Puranic, that's the key word. A Puranic prophecy that Prabhupada fulfilled. Anybody know? In other words, it's going to be at least a 5,000-year-old prophecy. Puranic. People know Gaudiya, but they don't know Puranic. This was published in the 1996 Centennial Vyasa Puja book. So that's 19 years ago. Anybody in ISKCON 19 years ago? No? Yes? Okay. Vanamali Prabhu. It was the first time we had a nice big oversized book for Prabhupada. So in the introduction to that Vyasa Puja book, Lokanath Maharaj, who was a centennial minister, he published the findings of some ISKCON scholars about the position of the founder Acharya. And he also included prophecies that Prabhupada fulfilled, and this was one. It's from the Brahma Vaivarta Purana, and the situation is, Krishna is about to leave the planet, and Ganga Devi, the goddess Ganga, is very worried. She goes to Dwarka and she says, quote, "O Lord, we can see that your pastimes are about to end, and people are becoming more and more materialistic. You have been very merciful to us. After you leave, however, all the sinful people of Kali Yuga will bathe in our waters, and we will become overwhelmed with sinful reactions." Smiling, the Lord replied, "Be patient." Prabhu, why don't you read that?
After 5,000 years, my mantra Upasaka, worshipper of the holy name, will appear in this world and spread chanting of my holy name everywhere.
Right, so if you see the series of, this is a whole conversation spanning, well, text 50-51 is where he says that, but Krishna says that. It's a little controversial. Some scholars interpret the mantra Upasaka as being Lord Chaitanya. But either way, as we're going to see in this lesson, even if you say the mantra Upasaka is Lord Chaitanya, who did Lord Chaitanya leave it to spread it all over the world? It was Prabhupada. Yeah. Okay, so there's more too, because actually it's from text 49 through 60 or 59. You hear more. Quote, not only in Bharatvarsha, this is Krishna still the Ganga, not only in Bharatvarsha, but also all over the world, people will chant Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. By this chanting, the whole world will become Ekavarna, one designation, namely Hari Bhaktas, devotees of Lord Hari. And because the devotees of Lord Hari are so pure, anyone who contacts them will become purified from sinful reactions. So these pure devotees, the ones who have been inspired by my mantra Upasaka, will visit Bharatvarsha and purify you of sinful reactions by bathing in your sacred waters. So Krishna turned Ganga's words right around on her. She said, all these Kali Yuga people, they're going to come and dump their bad karma in our waters. And Krishna said, no. So many saints are going to come, inspired by my mantra Upasaka, and they're going to come and bathe in your and purify you. He turns it right around. Now, here's the line, the only line of this prophecy that Prabhupada ever told us. And when you hear the line, you're going to recognize it, probably. But I want you to tell me why this was the only line that Prabhupada told us. Krishna finishes by saying, here's the line, this period of worldwide chanting of Hare Krishna will continue for
10,000 years.
Yeah, now, why in the world did Prabhupada only tell us that? And he did tell us that.
Because at the end of 10,000 years of Kali, it will get more and more intense. People.
No, I don't think you understood the question. Prabhupada, he didn't tell us the whole prophecy here. He didn't say it in Mantra Upasaka. He just said this last line, that this will continue for 10,000 years. Why was that the only part of the prophecy that he told us? You know?
Maybe Srila Prabhupada wanted to be humble.
Yeah, that was not Prabhupada's way. He was so utterly and absolutely transparent to Krishna. He was never directing people toward himself. Because if he told us the backstory, you know, the background to the story, we would have said, oh, you're the Mantra Upasaka, you did it. But that's not Prabhupada's way. This is not called the Bhaktivedanta Swami movement, it's called the Hare Krishna movement. And that's what sets this movement apart from all the other gurus and swamis who come to the West especially, or maybe even in India. It's all about them, right? I'm the latest avatar, I'm the, you know. So, that's Prabhupada, that's our founder Acharya. Utterly and absolutely transparent to Krishna. Now, that's the Puranic prophecy, although it's a little controversial, because there's different interpretations of who the Mantra Upasaka is. But either way, who did it? Who took it all over the world, right? Okay. Now, same image, but does anybody know? Some devotees know that, but does anybody in the room know what Gaudiya prophecy that was written down 500 years ago? Now, Gaudiya means since Lord Chaitanya's time, right? So, some devotees know this one, that Prabhupada fulfilled. You know? Well, that hasn't, yeah, that's Lord Chaitanya saying that his name will be, but what I mean to say, let me make it a little more explicit. Can you name a prophecy that's pointing to a person, just like Krishna said, my Mantra Upasaka. So this prophecy I'm thinking of is also pointing to a person. And that prophecy, Lord Chaitanya, my holy name will be spread all over the world. Yes, okay. So this is a similar situation. It says in Sri Chaitanya Mangala by Srila Lochandas Thakur that Narada Muni, just as Ganga was worried about what's going to happen in this Kali Yuga, so Narada Muni, he was also very worried. So he met Lord Chaitanya in Golok Navdvip, the Navdvip section of Golok, where Lord Chaitanya is eternally performing Sankirtan. And he said, you know, similar, with Kali Yuga, this is going to be so bad. How are we going to help these people? They're going to suffer like anything. So, Lord Chaitanya says, not to worry, with the powerful chopper of Nam Sankirtan, I will cut the hard knots of demoniac desires from the hearts of everyone. And here's the Bengali verse. Yadi papi chadi dharma dure deshe yoy mora senapati bhakta yaibe tatoy. Alright, want to read?
Even if the sinners reject religion or flee to foreign countries, I will send more senapati bhakta, my military field commander, to go there and deliver.
Even if the sinners reject religion, and that's what's happening all over the world. People are so disgusted by what goes on in the name of God, right? I mean, look at the jihadis, look at all this religious fanatics all over the world, you know. Flee to foreign countries. So, like, you know, you go to Europe. I mean, practically all of Europe is so secular now. They hardly even care about God at all. They think God is just an imagination, or they make fun of religion, and mainly because of the misuse of religion. Yeah, what goes on in the name of God. I will send my military field commander to go there and deliver them. So that's what Prabhupada did. He came and he reestablished faith in the faithless. He turned sinners into saints. And he would use these military images a lot. I don't know if you know that. Like even in Bhagavad Gita, Prabhupada, there's one purport where Prabhupada says, one should execute Krishna consciousness as if in, you know, military discipline. It's a discipline. Bhakti has disciplines. It's not just some party, you know. Although we say Sankirtan party. But what do the devotees do? The difference between devotees and non-devotees is that devotees party in the morning. We sing and dance when everybody's, right? And then right now everybody's starting to wake up in Mumbai and they're going to go out and party right now. What is night for all beings is the time of awakening for the self-control. That's true literally and metaphorically too. Okay, so Prabhupada, he did that. How many times did Prabhupada circle the globe, do you know? 14 times in 12 years. Whew. Yes, too much. Okay, so that was 500 years ago. Now, more devotees, even more devotees know the next prophecy. Who knows the late 19th century prophecy, Gaudiya prophecy, that Prabhupada fulfilled? Anybody know? Who? Bhakti Vinod. Oh, what did he say? Maybe I'm going to learn something new now. What did Bhaktisiddhanta say?
I may be wrong, but he said that somebody will go and...
No, that's Bhakti, that's his father, Bhakti Vinod Thakur. Okay, you read this, Prabhu, read that.
A personality will soon appear in order to preach the teachings of Sri Chaitanya and move unrestrictedly over the whole world with his message.
Right. This is Bhakti Vinod Thakur. He not only said it, he published it. See this? In Sajjana Toshini in 1885. He foresaw so many things. He foresaw the Hare Krishna movement. You know, he saw so many coming to Mayapur from all countries all over the world. He saw the TOVP going up, the Adbhuta Mandir, you know. And he predicted 11 years before Prabhupada appeared that somebody's going to come and he's going to do it. He's going to spread it all over the world. So here's Prabhupada commenting in a Vyasa Puja address in Los Angeles, 1968. Prabhupada had a keen sense of history. So he said here, quote, he, 1896, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, wanted to introduce this Krishna consciousness movement by sending his book, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, His Life and Precepts. So that the year that Prabhupada was born, 1896, Bhaktivinoda sent his book to the West about Lord Chaitanya. It's to many universities. Fortunately, that year was my birth year, and by Krishna's arrangement, my Guru Maharaj and I came in contact. I was born in a different family. My Guru Maharaj was born in a different family. This is kind of a famous recording, if you know Prabhupada's tapes. Because then Prabhupada says, who knew that I will come to his protection? Who knew that I would come in America? Who knew that you American boys will come to me? These are all Krishna's arrangement. So now we're going to take a look at some historical arrangements that Lord Chaitanya made to send his Senapati Bhakta, his military field commander, to the West to just the right place at just the right time, and how Lord Chaitanya orchestrated world events after he disappeared to make the time favorable for his Senapati Bhakta. Okay. So the first thing Lord Chaitanya did to set the stage, how did Lord Chaitanya set the world stage for Srila Prabhupada's advent? Is what? What did he do? As the picture tells you. Yeah, he came. Lord Chaitanya came and he established the Yuga Dharma. Chanted and danced Hare Krishna. Okay, so you read, Mataji. Whoop.
In the 16th century, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's Sankirtan movement ignited a bhakti renaissance in India.
Right. Renaissance in India, yes. Now, we asked the question last night, why did Lord Chaitanya let his renaissance get overshadowed by so many bogus sampradayas? So now we're going to see. You have an answer? Okay, so that was in the 16th century he came. He came in the 15th, and mostly it was in the 16th that his pastimes were enacted. And then he disappeared, and okay, Mataji, read that.
During the 17th and 18th centuries, when Lord Chaitanya's movement was forced underground in India, the age of discovery and the Industrial Revolution brought technology and new horizons to Europe.
Yes. When Lord Chaitanya was on the planet, as Kaviraj Goswami noted, he inspired everyone to develop their intimate love with Krishna. May that Lord, this is the 4th verse of CC, who was known as the son of Srimachi Sachi Devi, be transcendentally situated in the innermost chambers of your heart, resplendent with the radiance of molten gold. He has appeared in the age of Kali to establish what no one ever revealed before, the most sublime and radiant mellow of devotional service, the mellow of conjugal love. So Lord Chaitanya came to reveal intimate relationships with the Supreme. And so in other words, he was encouraging everyone to explore that, in the innermost chambers of your heart, that inner space. Now in the West, that Renaissance was reflected materially as the people exploring the outer world. Instead of exploring the inner world, what happened in the West is they were throwing off the shackles of a corrupt church and medieval ways of thinking, and they began to explore, Galileo with his telescope, the stars, and then they invented the microscope and looking at the molecular structure of things. And so the age of discovery, all these inventions started coming, and they started sailing around the world, and they found India. Columbus, he discovered America. He was actually looking for a way to go to India, and he sailed west. And so Lord Chaitanya, he was allowing the Westerners to develop their yantra, their machine technology, while he was allowing his own movement to be submerged, overshadowed by so many sahaja groups. Now, the 17th and 18th. So, yeah, now, Mataji, read that.
In the late 19th century, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur revived Lord Chaitanya's pure teachings and envisioned a worldwide movement of Krishna consciousness. Right.
But Thakur knew that if we're going to start making this prediction that Vanamali Prabhu started to say, Prithivite Achiyata Nagaradi Gram, in as many towns and villages as there are on the surface of the earth, my holy name will be sung and preached. That appears in Chaitanya Bhagavat. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur, who knew that Shastra, if we're going to start making this happen, it wasn't happening. It was just some prophecy that wasn't happening. Then we're going to have a worldwide movement here. And it's going to have to be many gurus and disciples working cooperatively, collectively, combinedly. It's going to take an international effort. And there's going to have to be a governing body. Where did Bhaktivinoda Thakur get this notion of a governing body committee? Do anybody know? You know this? He took it from the British railways. They organized the railways, and they had a GBC. He noticed, the Thakur was great. He was great at using everything in Krishna's service. So that's what we need. We need a GBC. We need a governing body. So that's where it comes from. It comes from the railways, the Indian railway system. But, okay. So So he envisioned the movement, but as I said last night, he didn't have time to manifest. He knew his days were numbered, so he prayed for his ray of Vishnu's son, who moved the movement forward by actually starting something. He started the Gaudiya mission. Something actually appeared. So that's the next thing. Mataji, read that.
In the early 20th century, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's Gaudiya mission revived Krishna consciousness throughout India and sent the first Vaishnava preachers abroad.
Right, and that, as we said, was the crowning glory of the Gaudiya mission. But they didn't have much success. And that's why they were recalled by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta. And then, as you may know, unfortunately, after the Thakur left, Prabhupada said he left early. We're going to see that in the next lesson, whenever that happens. He was disappointed. He left. He was only 62 years old when he left. Only 62. I mean, I just turned 69. You know, so 62. And unfortunately, they didn't follow his instructions. He said, so you have to work conjointly. You have to form a GBC, you cooperate, and immediately after he left, they started fighting over who's going to replace their founder Acharya. You don't replace the founder Acharya, you simply work cooperatively to carry on his mission. Okay, so they didn't do that. So they fell to quarreling. They began to even fight in the courts over who owned the assets of the mission, you know, the properties, the money, the temple. It was a mess, you know. Luckily, Prabhupada, he was aloof from that. He was a householder, he was living outside, he had his own business, but it broke his heart to see the mission become like that, as you'll see in the next lesson. So, it was only when Prabhupada came to the West to try to revive the mission, he was the only one who actually did what Srila Bhaktisiddhanta wanted everybody to do. He wanted them all to go west to work together to make it happen. That it started to revive. But before Prabhupada came, look at this. This is some fine-tuning that Lord Chaitanya did. He set he set the course of history in a grand, sweeping way, but then he made some fine adjustments. When the 1960s came in, and look at this. In the 1960s, why don't you read that?
In the 1960s, when Srila Prabhupada sailed to the West, the Roman Catholic Church eased its attitude towards other faith traditions. The USA relaxed its Asian immigration laws, and the American counterculture began to look to the East for truth.
Right. Now these are extraordinary adjustments to history that Lord Chaitanya made. First one was a religious adjustment in terms of the Catholic Church. Then there's a political adjustment in terms of immigration. And then there's a cultural adjustment in terms of the counterculture. So in 1961, are there any former Roman Catholics in the house? Probably not. This is India, so there's always a few in the West. But there was a pope named Pope John the 23rd, who was in many ways similar to Pope Francis today. Pope Francis is very popular because he's very humble and he's trying to remind the church that, come on, we're supposed to, you know, help people. And anyway, there's a lot of parallels to Francis and John the 23rd. Pope John, he called a special GBC meeting. He called a special, what was called an ecumenical council. He wanted to reform the church. He wanted to make it more relevant and purify it from its materialistic habits, just like Francis is trying to do. So they had a big meeting. It started in 1961. It went to 1965. 4 years they had meetings. He even died in office, 63. He died, and then luckily his successor, Pope Paul, somebody, continued the meetings. And then in 1965, the very year that Prabhupada sailed to the West, they concluded their meetings and they had many resolutions. And one of the resolutions said that it recognized that God's grace could manifest in other faith traditions, not just the Roman Catholic Church, for the first time. You know, ever since the Catholic Church started, the Holy Roman Empire, you know, ever since the 3rd or 4th century, they dropped their claim of being exclusive, the only way to God, you know. It was no longer necessarily true that if you weren't a Roman Catholic, you were going to hell. Thank you very much. So this gave subtle but very powerful psychological permission for Roman Catholics worldwide, and there's about 1 billion of them now, to look at other faith traditions and to appreciate how God can reveal, manifest His mercy and His grace and His wisdom through other traditions. So in 1966, when Prabhupada started his movement, for example, there was this one recovering Roman Catholic, one former Roman Catholic, a young man. He was reading Buddhism, the Buddha, and he was working in the Lower East Side of New York City, and he was rushing from his job at the New York City welfare office to his apartment for lunch. And as he walked down 2nd Avenue, he walked by 26 2nd Avenue, and out of the corner of his eye, it struck him. There was somebody in that storefront that looked to him like the Buddha. Big earlobes, peach-colored robes, sitting cross-legged, a protruding belly, a little bit of... And he didn't have time to go in, though. So he just kept going. But he saw the sign. It said, Bhagavad Gita classes, Monday, Wednesday, Friday evening, 7 to 9 p.m. So at the first opportunity, he went back because he was fascinated. Somebody looks like the Buddha. You know, that he'd been reading the Buddha, right? So he goes in and he sits down in Swamiji's Gita class. And he starts listening. Speaking of sitting down, I'm going to sit down. And then at the end of the class, he asks a very Buddhist kind of question. And the question is, Swamiji, how can I understand that I'm just nothing? Because that's the Buddha's solution to suffering. Did you know that? You just make yourself nothing. You just get rid of your individuality, your ego, your desire, and there's no more suffering because there's no more you. Nirvana means out, like a candle. It's like the old joke. There's an old medical joke, and the punchline is, the operation was a success. Unfortunately, the patient died. So the Buddha's solution really is no solution because you disappear, you know, it's like merging, right? And of course, natvevahang jatu nasang, it's not that you really cease to be, because we can't cease to be, life's eternal, but there's a sense of suspending your consciousness, your individuality. So what does Swamiji reply? He says, you're not nothing, you're something, but you're not this body. And so that began a relationship between Steve, the young man, and Swamiji. And that was in July, and then in September, on Radhastami, Steve took initiation, and he became Satsvarupa Brahmachari. And then 6 years later, in 1972, he became Satsvarup Das Goswami. And then 6 years later, in 1978, after Prabhupada had left, the GBC asked Satsvarup Maharaj to write Prabhupada's biography. And he did. These are all the arrangements of Krishna. So that's a religious adjustment that Lord Chaitanya made. Then, the same year, 1965, this resolution was passed, and Prabhupada came to America. Prabhupada would not have been able to come to America had the United States Immigration and Naturalization Service not eased its absurdly restrictive Asian immigration laws. There were no Asians coming into it. They weren't allowed. It must have been a hangover from World War II when the Japanese were our enemies, and they just weren't allowed to come. I hardly saw an Asian person growing up. But mysteriously, that policy was eased. Prabhupada was able to enter the country. He was eventually able to get what we call a green card, a residency card, and come and go freely and preach. So that was a big adjustment, political adjustment. But here's the biggest one. Look at this. And the American counterculture began to look to the East for truth. Lord Chaitanya gave Prabhupada an audience. He didn't have anybody who cared about what he was saying in India, if you've read the Lilamrita. They didn't care anything about a spiritual revolution. And they don't care either. They didn't care. Who was the first Prime Minister of India? Jawaharlal Nehru. Was he interested in a spiritual revolution? He was interested in becoming Western. He was embarrassed by anything Vedic. Prabhupada said, Nehru and his father used to come in my pharmacy in Prayag, Allahabad. And Prabhupada noticed that they always bought Western stuff. They didn't buy anything homeopathic or Ayurvedic or anything. So, what did Prabhupada find when he came to America? There's a whole generation of people like myself. I was part of that generation. We were all just rejecting our culture because it was such a, the war, it was the Vietnam War was the big ignition to the whole thing. We didn't want to fight. We knew it was a terrible war. And we were so sick of the whole materialistic rat race. We rejected everything. We rejected our families, our schools, our careers, the whole military-industrial complex. There was a whole, can you imagine a whole generation of people just hitting the road and looking for the truth? You've read The Journey Home by Radhanath Maharaj? Have you read that book? You should read it. It's a good book. Maharaj talks about his journey to Krishna consciousness. There was a whole generation of people doing what he did, only he did it really well. He did it. His story is one of the best I've ever heard. Well, it's the best, actually, because he ends up at Prabhupada's lotus feet, hitchhiking all the way to India, from Europe. It's just amazing. So if you read that book, you'll get an idea of the times. And that was the time, Lord Chaitanya created this unique time of a whole generation of people rejecting the status quo and looking to the East. We were reading all these books, like Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramhansa Yogananda, and all these books by Siddhartha, Journey to the East by Hermann Hesse, Be Here Now by Baba Ram Das, all these Eastern-inspired books. And then the Beatles were our Pied Pipers. They were calling the tune, and they were being influenced by Ravi Shankar. This is George. Ravi Shankar, then the Maharishi, and then they got Darshan and Prabhupada. This is Lord Chaitanya, creating a special time. Yeah. Okay. So, what did Prabhupada do when he got to America? Alone in America, Srila Prabhupada tried to revive Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's Gaudiya mission. And now we're going to take a look at how Prabhupada was trying to revive. What was Prabhupada doing when he came to America? He was doing two things. He was studying Americans. Where did he stay when he first came?
He stayed with
Yes. No, he arrived in Boston and then he traveled to Pennsylvania to stay with the Agarwals in Butler, Pennsylvania, near Pittsburgh. And the husband was Indian, and the lady was American. And so their townhouse was kind of small. He stayed there about a month. But he couldn't stay in their house because it was small. So they put him up down the street at what's called a YMCA. You know what a YMCA is? They have that in India? It's a Christian thing. It's a place for travelers. Young Men's Christian Association. So they have rooms and a swimming pool and you can stay. It's like for travelers. So they put Prabhupada up at a room in the Y. We call it the Y. And then he'd walk several blocks to the Agarwals to cook for him and them, and you know, they loved it. You know, they loved Prabhupada's cooking. And he was studying Americans through the, and Sally Agarwal, she did a very brilliant thing. When Prabhupada first came, she knew that, you know, Butler was a small town. So small town, everybody knows everybody's business. And they knew, she knew that when Prabhupada came, they were going to, he was going to be a sensation, you know, because he's dressing as he is, you know, in uncompromised Vaishnav sannyasi dress, you know, the shaved head and the robes and the whole thing, you know, and pointy white rubber shoes. I mean, just the word Swami. You know, in 1965 in Butler, Pennsylvania, if you said the word Swami, you might as well have said genie out of a bottle. Somebody from Aladdin's lamp, you know, some Houdini or something strange, right? So Sally Agarwal called up the newspaper, the Butler Eagle, and said, my name is Sally Agarwal, and I'd like you to know that for the next few weeks I'm going to be hosting a real live Swami from India at my house. I thought you might like to know that. Maybe you'd like to interview him. Oh, and they just jumped right on it. Oh, sure, yeah. This was a preemptive strike so that nobody would think that an alien had just landed, you know. So Prabhupada was studying Americans, and sometimes he'd speak in churches, and you know, Sally lined up some, and she had friends over. And so Sally says one day the Swami was in her bathroom, and all of a sudden water started coming out of the bathroom. So she bangs on the door. Swami, are you all right, Swamiji? She opens the door, and there's Prabhupada. He's trying to wash his clothes on the bathroom floor, Indian style, right? You know, you have the sloping drain, a sloping floor into the drain, and he was mushing and gushing and whapping and bapping, you know. Oh, Swamiji, I'll have to show you the washing machine. Washing machine? What's that, you know? And then Prabhupada saw how Sally cleaned her house. You know, with a vacuum cleaner, right? Vacuum cleaner? Prabhupada told us later, sometimes when I was in New York, I would just get on the bus and put a coin in the meter and I'd just ride around all afternoon just to see how you people live. You know, something amazing, something wonderful, right? Yeah, so Prabhupada was studying Americans, but he was doing something else. He arrived in late September, and all that fall, he was studying Americans. He didn't have any friends. He didn't know anybody. Just had this impersonal yogi, Dr. Mishra, Ramamurti Mishra, who kindly put him up, gave him a room to stay in the Upper West Side. But, so Prabhupada was writing who? He was writing letters. Who was he writing? His godbrothers. Hey, I'm here, I made it to America. This is what Guru Maharaj wanted. Remember the mission, remember? Hey, 30 years ago, you know. Writing so many letters, encouraging them, look, what's done is done. Okay, misunderstandings, you know, fighting, but here I am. And, you know, I see there's a whole fertile preaching field here. Everybody's mad after anything Eastern or Indian. They're mad after yoga, meditation, reincarnation, vegetarianism. They want to come and help. And by the way, you know, the Ramakrishna missions here, they call it the Vedanta Society in America. They're here, and Prabhupada said with their 10th class rubbish philosophy, they are fooling the Americans who don't know anything about the Vedas. So they're thinking, the Americans are thinking this is the absolute, you know. And they're thriving because they're well organized and they have, you know, they're reaching the Americans and the Americans are paying big money. And they got $1 million building here in New York City. We need $1 million building too. We can do it. We got the real thing. But we Gaudiya Math people, Prabhupada said, we become paupers. We become beggars because of all the fighting. So, So in the Bhaktivedanta database, does anybody have the database? You have the database? Yeah. Well, you don't have to look it up now, but we're going to show you, you can see all these letters that Prabhupada wrote, pre-1966 letters, 65. And if you only have time to read one letter, if you ever get into the database, you read November 8th, 1965, Prabhupada is writing his godbrother, Bhaktivilas Tirtha Maharaj, whose name in the Gaudiya Mutt days had been Kunja Bihari, Kunja Babu. He was the manager of the Gaudiya Mutt. He had been in the Ramakrishna mission, but he converted to the Gaudiya mission. He was a very good organizer. He was good with money. He was a good fundraiser. And Prabhupada was writing him because he knew that this person, you know, he was a good organizer, good fundraiser, and he's encouraging him to raise some funds so they could, you know, get something going in the West. So listen, here's Prabhupada's move. This letter excerpt, it's a long letter, but we're going to show you one excerpt from the letter. This excerpt shows you how Prabhupada's mood was not to be the founder Acharya of anything. He didn't care who took the credit for anything. There's one American president, Harry Truman, 1940s. He said, it's amazing how much you can get done when no one cares who gets the credit. So here's Prabhupada. So why don't you read? You want to read?
So here is a chance for cooperation between us, and I shall be glad to know if you are ready for this cooperation. I came here to study the situation and I find it very nice, and if you are also agreeable to cooperate.
Whoa, wait a minute, stop. You see? Cooperate, cooperation, cooperation. In the first two sentences, Prabhupada has said forms of that word 3 times. That's Prabhupada's Mahavakya. And he told us too, if you love me, you'll cooperate. That's the proof of your love. Okay, go ahead. And if you're also agreeable to cooperate,
it will be all very nice by the will of Srila Prabhupada.
You mean Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, right?
If you agree, then take it for granted that I am one of the workers of the Sri Mayapur Chaitanya Matha.
Okay, the reason he says that is because Bhaktivilas Tirtha Maharaj is the Mahant. He's in charge of that Sri Mayapur Chaitanya Mat. So Prabhupada is saying, look, I'm just a worker. I'm just your worker. I'm your servant here. I have no
ambition for becoming the proprietor of any matha or mandir, but I want working facilities.
Yeah, you can be in charge, Maharaj. I'm your man here. I'm in America. I can organize it here. I can recruit so many bhaktas. I just need funds, and you. And elsewhere in the letter, Prabhupada said, by Srila Prabhupada, Bhaktisiddhanta Prabhupada's grace, you, Tirtha Maharaj, you have those Calcutta Marwaris, those business-minded Marwaris, you have them in the palm of your hand. You can inspire them to contribute big time. And you also have the connections in Delhi to get the Indian government to release those rupees, which they didn't want to do usually, so we can convert them to dollars in America. You can do it. So Prabhupada, he was writing letters like this. And what kind of a response did he get?
Very favorable.
Very favorable?
Not very.
That's right. Not at all favorable. In fact, sometimes people criticized him. One said that what he was attempting was ludicrous. And Prabhupada had to write back and say, ludicrous? Don't you remember? This is what Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, this is what Prabhupada wanted. He wanted us all to work together, work combinedly. So what Lord Chaitanya revealed to Prabhupada between September 1965 and July 1966, when Prabhupada started ISKCON officially, legally, was that, you know, they're not going to help you. They can't help you because too many offenses have happened. They can't cooperate. They can't work together. You're going to have to go it alone. Maharaj, with your Guru Maharaj and me, Lord Chaitanya, and we will help you. So that first year, from 65 to 66, let's see, Prabhupada went from obscurity to Swamiji. Okay, Prabhu, why don't you read that?
Ignored by his Srila Prabhupada was obliged to found a fresh branch of Gaudiya Sampradaya on July 13, 1966 in New York City. He incorporated the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, ISKCON, signing the papers with his sannyas name only, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami.
Yeah, I say sannyas name only because Lord Chaitanya has already revealed to Prabhupada that he is to be the founder of a fresh branch of the Gaudiya. He's going to have to revive the Gaudiya Sampradaya because the whole thing, you know, dissolved, basically. The Gaudiya mission dissolved. And Lord Prabhupada tried to revive it, but they didn't cooperate. So there's no, you know, Prabhupada or founder Acharya or anything. It's Swami. It's A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami. Prabhupada was reminiscing 6 years after that, in 1972. He's reminiscing about that first year that he was alone. I remember that year because I was born in New York City. I grew up in Stamford, Connecticut, which is just 35 miles up the coast. And that winter, 65 going into 66, it was brutal. We even had a blackout for 3 days. A blackout. And Prabhupada, it's not mentioned in Lilamrita, but he lived through that. But that was very dramatic. My father thought there was a nuclear war or something because the whole New York City was plunged into darkness. Anyway, in 1972, Prabhupada wrote a New York devotee, quote, "When I was alone in your New York, I was thinking, who will listen to me in this horrible, sinful place? All right, I shall stay a little longer. At least I can distribute a few of my books. That is something. But Krishna was all along preparing something I could not see. And he brought you to me, one by one, sincere American boys and girls, to be trained up for doing the work of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Now I can see that it is a miracle. Otherwise, your city of New York, one single old man, with only a few books to sell, for barely getting eatables, how he can survive, especially in a brutal winter like that. What to speak of introducing God consciousness movement for saving the humankind? That is Krishna's miracle. Now I can see it." So Prabhupada, he was always astounded by the Hare Krishna movement. He was always amazed at what Krishna was doing through him. He would say this all the time in letters to us. So between 1965 and 1966, Prabhupada went from obscurity, and finally he started to get some followers. Some people started to come and actually hear him regularly, and they called him Swamiji. Okay, let's see here. Okay, so in 66, Prabhupada went to San Francisco to found, in January, to establish the second branch. And he did. He did the same thing he did in New York, only it was a different crowd. And California, it was totally different mood. It was more wild, you know. New York was more, you know, New York is a tougher place, but California is sort of wide open and freewheeling and you know. Anyway, different mood. And Prabhupada, whatever the mood was, he worked with it, and he inspired people to join. So he was there from January to April. And then in April, he came back to New York, and then he was with the devotees. And then in May, toward the end of May, there's always a holiday in America. It's called, well, they used to call it, you know, they still do. It's called Memorial Day. when America remembers all the people who died in wars to defend America, to protect the corporate interests. That's actually what's going on. These poor people, they fight and die in these wars just so, you know, the big businessmen can keep their positions. That's basically what happens. But anyway, they call it Memorial Day, right? So Prabhupada, he's, instead of, you know, so he takes the opportunity, he's planning a whole talk. He's going to give a speech on the peace formula, how to end war. He has to come to honor, you know, soldiers dying in Kali Yuga wars, but he wants to talk about how to end war. So he's preparing a whole speech based on Gita 5:29. Bhokta Rang Jagatapasa. And Krishna, he's the supreme enjoyer, proprietor, and friend of everyone. And if you know that, if everybody tunes into that, then there can be peace. So he's getting ready to do that. And, you know, he's, let's see, he's 1967. So he's past 70. But he's always, you know, he's doing so much. He's chanting. There's mridungas now. There's a mridunga. I think there's one mridunga arrived, yeah, in 67. And he's translating in the middle of the night, and he's, you know, he's just doing so much. And the devotees just thought this was just, I guess this is normal for him. You know, this is the wonder that was Swamiji. He has more energy than all of us, you know. But on the eve of this speech that he was going to give, he had a heart attack / stroke, a heart attack and a stroke. He collapsed in a devotee's arms. And the devotees were shocked. And they had to take him to the hospital. And then they finally got him released from the hospital, and they really couldn't help him much. But that was a wake-up call, as we say. It was a shock, because he had been taking care of all of them, and now they had to take care of him. So first they brought Prabhupada down to the shore, the beach at New Jersey, and but it wasn't so sunny. It wasn't kind of blustery. It was kind of chilly, and it wasn't good enough to get Prabhupada better. So the devotees in California wrote and said, "Oh, come out to California. We're going to have a Rath Yatra." Because when Prabhupada established the second center in California, they established Lord Jagannath. That's where Jagannath Swami first appeared in ISKCON, if you know the story. Has Mother Malati ever been here to tell the story of Jagannath appearing? She stole him out of a store. You know, we didn't say stealing in those days. We said liberating the merchandise from the pigs. This is our hippie, you know, the counterculture. We would just take things, you know, and that was all right, because you were just liberating the merchandise from the greedy pigs. So one day she did this. They called it the three-fingered discount, you know. And then she brings this little Indian-looking figurine back from the import store, cost plus imports. And she says, "Hey, Swamiji, is this from India?" And then she's amazed, and Prabhupada does pranams, you know. "Oh, Lord Jagannath has come. Were there any more in the bin?" "Oh yeah, there were a couple of more." So then she goes back and she brings back Lord Balaram and Subhadra Maharani. That's how they got to ISKCON. Oh, and only in the Haight-Ashbury section of San Francisco in the late 1960s, this was the hippie capital of the world, you know, then Malati's husband, you know, Shyam Sundar, he carved the deities. He carved them. And then Prabhupada installed them, Swamiji installed them. Only, this is another arrangement by Krishna, only in the psychedelic capital of the counterculture, you know, the Haight-Ashbury district of San Francisco, could Lord Jagannath appear, and then people come into that temple and be told that he was God, you know, the large-eyed Lord. And then immediately people would accept it, you know. "Far out, man. Who's that? That's God, man." and follow the devotees and bow down, you know. Only, you know, it was just Krishna's brilliance that he would come in that time and place. So anyway, the devotee said, "Come on out, we're going to have a Rath Yatra," because Prabhupada told them about Rath Yatra. And what was the first Rath Yatra card? Anybody know from reading the Lamrita? It was a Hertz rented truck. It was a flatbed truck. There was a yellow cab, and then there was a flatbed, you know, and then the three deities were put kind of facing different ways off the back of the truck. So Prabhupada went out there in July because it wasn't working at Long Branch, New Jersey, the Jersey shore. So he went out and they put him up. They got Prabhupada a little Spanish bungalow called El Paradiso in a beach called Stinson Beach, and it was kind of far away from the temple. It was about an hour's drive up windy roads, and it wasn't really good for Prabhupada because it was very windy, and Prabhupada was so weak that he couldn't even go to the Rath Yatra. So he stayed back, and later on he got reports. But when he stayed back during the Rath Yatra parade, there was a very dramatic event that happened. It was a very historical moment, actually. And Mukunda Maharaj told about it. He gave a memoir in the Lilamrita, and also in his own book, Miracle on Second Avenue, which if you've ever seen that book, Miracle on Second Avenue, he gives a very detailed account. So, there's Prabhupada all bundled up, not feeling well. And so, the people who stayed back with Swamiji at El Paradiso Spanish bungalow was Mukunda, Hayagriva, and Kirtanananda. They were all initiated. And so they were worried because you know what Swamiji is saying? He's saying, you know, I'm going to have to go back to India to get better. I need India's heat, I need Ayurvedic medicine, massage, and I'm not getting any better here. So they're really getting worried because they're all neophyte. They're thinking, what's going to happen to us? If he goes, what's going to happen to us? You know, we're brand new in this, and we need him. So Kirtanananda and Hayagriva forced Mukunda to ask Swamiji a question he didn't want to ask. And here's the question. Okay, Vanamali Prabhu, read that.
When you die, what will happen to the woman? I asked. Will you have a successor who will continue your work and look after our spiritual education?
As I heard myself say the words, I realized it had been a mistake to ask this. The Swami sat silently, looking out the window at the sand dunes and the mountains. It was high tide, and I could hear the waves pounding the beach. Seagulls shrieked. The Swami muttered something quietly. I couldn't hear what you said, Swami, I said carefully. Can you repeat it? Read that.
Actually, it's an insult to the spiritual master, he said.
He turned away from the window and looked at me pensively, that means thoughtfully, as if he was hurt by my question. I'm sorry, Swami, I said. I felt like shrinking into the carpet. He closed his eyes. Outside, a dog barked. A shallow stream of tears appeared below each of his eyes and flowed over his cheeks. He slowly wiped them away. My spiritual master, he said, and his voice choked to gravel. I was stunned. What had I done? Read that.
My spiritual master, he said, he was no ordinary spiritual master.
No ordinary spiritual master.
He paused again and then whispered falteringly, he saved me.
And whispered falteringly, his voice broke. He saved me. Now, doesn't that look strange? He was no ordinary spiritual master. How can a spiritual master be ordinary? Do you remember what we saw? There was a philosophical distinction in the last lesson between one's personal spiritual master and the great Acharyas. Remember that? Usually Prabhupada would say regular guru, but in this case he said ordinary. And you're going to hear it again because Hayagriva and Kirtanananda were listening at the door. And later, Hayagriva in his book, The Hare Krishna Explosion, have you heard of that book?
Yeah.
Great book about how the movement was launched. He said later in the day, Prabhupada started talking about that exchange earlier, and Prabhupada gave the purport. So read this, Prabhu.
Later Swamiji tells what we could have always known. There is no one to replace him. The very idea is insulting. If someone comes and tells you something different, he says, you will be confused.
You will be confused. That's why Prabhupada was so upset by the question. Because Prabhupada knows by now that he's being asked to lead this fresh branch of the Gaudiya Sampradaya, and that he's being uniquely, specially, particularly empowered to do this, and that none of his godbrothers really could do it. They wouldn't cooperate with him. So he knows that, you know, if we do start going to them, we're going to be confused. And that happened later, after Prabhupada left. We did go, and there was confusion. So it's interesting that Prabhupada said that way back then. So in 65 he was in obscurity, 66 he was Swamiji, and now in 67 what I say is that it's only he. He goes from obscurity to Swamiji to only he. He's making it clear that he's the one to lead them, and don't even think of going to anybody else. Okay, so neglected by his godbrothers, Srila Prabhupada knows and is now disclosing that he is being uniquely empowered to lead the new international Vaishnavas as the founder Acharya of a dynamic branch of Lord Chaitanya's tree of love of God. Now, Prabhupada did something to balance that statement later in the year. That was in July. In November, Prabhupada wrote a letter to Brahmananda, the late Brahmananda Prabhu, who was the president of New York Temple then. Because Brahmananda was wondering how we're supposed to relate to his godbrothers. So Prabhupada is saying, quote, even amongst our godbrothers we have misunderstanding, but none of us is astray from the service of Krishna. My Guru Maharaj ordered us to execute his mission combinedly. Unfortunately, we're now separated, but none of us have stopped preaching Krishna consciousness. Even if there was misunderstanding amongst the godbrothers of my Guru Maharaj, none of them deviated from the transcendental loving service of Krishna. So he was Prabhupada's concern that we don't get a negative attitude toward his godbrothers, because even though it's true, and Prabhupada did write and say some heavy things about his godbrothers, he doesn't want us to start criticizing them, because they're our seniors. And that's Vaishnava Parad, and that's going to kill us. So it's the kind of balancing remark Prabhupada's making here. Prabhupada wanted us to be respectful to his godbrothers, everlastingly our seniors, and at the same time not seek guidance from those who had fragmented his Guru Maharaj's mission. By dint of his unique surrender to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's order, Srila Prabhupada was uniquely empowered to communicate Lord Chaitanya's mission to all who strictly followed his teachings. So that was 67, only he. Now in 68, the next year, he's going to go from only he to Prabhupada. Anybody know the story of how Prabhupada became Prabhupada? We're going to hear it now. Okay, so it's May 1968, and Prabhupada is in Boston, where I joined. If you know, anybody know American geography, Boston is in the northeast side of America. It's cold there. It's a cold place. in the winter. And that's where the Jaladuta landed on September 18th, 1965. In May 1968, Prabhupada decided the time had come for the first Brahman initiation. He had initiated some first initiates, and now he said the time has come for second initiation. So immediately Pradyumna, who had been a first initiate, who was learning Sanskrit, said, "Oh, we're going to have Boston Brahmins." Now that was a phrase that had been in America for about 100 years, because some Americans from that area, Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau, they were famous American philosophers. They had been reading Bhagavad Gita. So they began to, some Americans were aware of the Gita, and they were aware of Brahmins and things Vedic, and so that had phrase, Boston Brahmins, that had been in America for about 100 years. So when Pradyumna said that, Prabhupada said, "Oh yes, Boston Brahmins." He appeared to be aware of that. So it was fitting that his first Brahminical initiation be in Boston. So Prabhupada gave Brahmin initiation to some of the men, and there were two ladies present, Jadharani Mataji and Govinda Mataji, and they were among the first ladies to join. But Prabhupada was not offering it to them, because traditionally the women don't take it. They just, they follow their husband, and they participate in the husband's credit. They get for assisting him, they also get the credit for her husband's advancement, and there's no need for that. But Prabhupada's dealing with American girls here, and they're upset. The men are getting it, why can't we get it, right? This is the 1960s, the beginning of the feminist movement in America. Well, not the beginning, but it was ramped up. So, so they begin to fuss and fume, you know, and Prabhupada sees that, so Prabhupada thinks, oh, all right, why not? So Prabhupada gives them second initiation too. That was a good example of an adjustment Prabhupada would make. Prabhupada was representing the best of Vedic culture, but he was not limited to the way things had always been done in India. So he would innovate too. He would apply principles in an innovative way. He would adjust details. He would never break principles, but he would adjust details. To him, that was a detail. It wasn't a big deal. And then Govinda, in her memoirs, says, and she was serving as Prabhupada's secretary. And her husband, Gaur-Sundar, was serving as Prabhupada's servant. He was the male, so he was the personal servant. Govinda is the secretary. So she said her husband, Gaur-Sundar, was dabbling in Sanskrit, and Gaur-Sundar, he heard that the suffix ji was a term of endearment. You know, you say ji, like Swamiji, or, yeah, so we were saying Swamiji. So he asked Prabhupada if he could call his wife Govinda, Govinda ji. Some little cute pet name, you know. So Govinda tells now, so Gaur-Sundar decided he wanted to call me Govindaji, and so he asked Prabhupada, and Prabhupada said, no, actually Ji is a third-class form of address. It's better not to call her Govindaji. So I piped up, that means I spoke up. That's American slang. I piped up. I was sitting right in front of him, and I said, well, if it's a third-class form of address, why are we calling you G? Why are we calling you Swami G? Now you have to know that when you hear what follows here, you have to know that Govinda is a very straightforward American woman. Furthermore, she's from Texas, where they shoot straight. They're straight shooters. They say what they mean, and they mean what they say. All right? They shoot from the hip. So you're going to hear her talking to Swamiji in a way that you wonder, how can she talk like this to Prabhupada? But Prabhupada allowed this. he allowed a very kind of familiar, like he was like the grandfather and she was like the granddaughter, and she's scolding him sometimes. And yeah, it's just amazing how Govinda talked to Prabhupada, because he allowed it. Why are we calling you Swamiji? And he said, it's not very important. I said, oh no, it's very important. If it's a third-class form of address, then we don't want to call you that. Now we have to get a lady. You're going to be Govinda, all right? Now try to read it like a Texan. No, you can't do that. Y'all, that means you in Texas.
We want to call you the most first-class form of address. So tell us what would be a good name for you to call you by, for us to call you by. And he was very humble, very reluctant, but I praised him. We have got to change this. And he said, you can call me Gurudev or Guru Maharaj or Prabhupada.
Okay, see what's going on here? First the thing is, first he's very humble. He's trying to change the subject. He wants to avoid that. Because that's the way Prabhupada is. He's a humble Vaishnava, and he doesn't want to, this is what he's done all along. Like in the beginning, remember I said he stressed the chanting of Hare Krishna more than the rules. And then only when the person said, hey Swamiji, are there any rules? What about you mentioned there was rules to this thing, this club? Very good boy. And then Prabhupada posts the rules on the bathroom door the next day, right? Because Prabhupada knows they can follow the rules when they're ready for them, and they'll ask. So similarly, he's being called Swamiji, although he's starting a fresh branch of the Gaudiya Sampradaya. He knows that they don't know what that is. So he's letting them call him Swamiji, although it's a very familiar kind of address, and he's saying it's third class form of address. And now, there's a moment here when there's an opportunity to change that. At first, Prabhupada, he tries to change the subject. And then he sees what's happening. That Krishna is providing an opportunity for them to recognize really more, give them a proper address. So we've got to change this. And then he says, he gives them three options. You can call me Gurudev or Guru Maharaj or Prabhupada. So I said,
well, that's three. We need one. So which one is the best? And he answered, Srila Prabhupada is nice. That is the best. So I said, from today you will be called Srila Prabhupada.
Govinda Dasi ki! Yeah. That's what had happened. Now look at this. You can call me Gurudev. Imagine, Prabhupada said that these are very generic terms, right? We have many Gurudevs in our movement now, and there will be many more. Or Guru Maharaj, right? Or Prabhupada, and then he put Prabhupada in there. And then he left it to her, well, that's three. So which one? Well, that's three, we need one, He knew that she's not gonna let up until she gets the right one. So then Prabhupada revealed, Srila Prabhupada is nice. That is the best. Now, if Prabhupada had said Gurudev or Guru Maharaj, it wouldn't have been such a momentous change. But he's revealing the name that actually identifies his position. He's the Prabhu Pad, the Prabhu at whose feet Pad all the other Prabhus sit. Right? So it's a very significant event here. And then Govinda said, so I told all the devotees. Some of the devotees didn't like it because it's kind of a tongue twister. Prabhupada and Swamiji, it kind of flows more easily. But we gradually started calling him Srila Prabhupada from that time. So that's when it happened, in May '68, all because Govinda insisted. That's another arrangement by Lord Chaitanya. But again, Prabhupada didn't demand that title. He waited until Lord Chaitanya provided the right time. Okay. No, that's May 68. Now we fast forward 2 years, 2 months to July 70. That's the month I joined. And the same month I joined, I didn't know it, but Prabhupada formally identified his position in relationship to ISKCON in a document. When I joined, it was a very sensitive time of the movement when I joined. I didn't know it, although I sensed there was something going on. There was actually a threat to ISKCON. There was a threat from some jealous, envious people in India. They were giving ISKCON senior devotees, senior means they were 2, 3, 4 years in the movement, right? They were giving those devotees a compromised view of Prabhupada from Prabhupada's old days in the Gaudiya mission. And they were getting an idea that maybe Prabhupada's an ordinary man. So Prabhupada knew what was going on. So to protect ISKCON, Prabhupada revealed his pranam mantra, I think in March of that year. He started the morning program. The month I joined, that's when the morning program started. Mangal Arati. That was a big change. And then to protect ISKCON, Prabhupada asked some of his leading, senior devotees if they would agree to be on something called a governing body committee. Prabhupada formed the GBC. So, want to read?
On July 28, 1970, when Srila Prabhupada legally established a governing body commission to manage ISKCON, he formally identified his relationship to his mission.
So you'll see in this document, if in the database, it's called Direction of Management, under legal documents. And right here it says, want to read that?
International Society for Krishna Consciousness, Incorporated, founder Acharya, His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada.
Right, and it lists all there was 12 of them, and they were all householders, because there was hardly any swamis in the movement. I think there was maybe Kirtanananda Maharaj, he was on there, and maybe Jayapataka Maharaj, yeah. But everybody else was a householder, and and this is to protect ISKCON, because the time has come to form a governing body. Prabhupada was determined that what happened to the Gaudiya mission not happen to ISKCON, because it was only in the last 24 hours of his life that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta told his disciples on his deathbed, disappearance bed, that they should form a governing body. You should work conjointly. So Prabhupada, 7 years before he disappeared, he formed this body to start training his leaders to take over the management. Not to replace him, but to become the ultimate managing authority, manage the preaching mission. He wanted it to go on. So that was very significant. And then the next day, July 29th, he separately established another legal entity. Anybody know what it was?
PBT?
Yes. Why did he do that separately from ISKCON?
So that book can be distributed freely and all the money can be used for temple construction and book preaching.
Yeah, but why that could have been under ISKCON.
I heard that even if the ISKCON stops,
That's right.
the book distribution, if anyone distributes books and anyone read, he can even start the ISKCON movement.
Right, because you know what happened after the Gaudiya mission, when the Gaudiya mission collapsed, when they were fighting? The press, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's press, was sold to start, I think it was to pay some legal costs. Anyway, it was sold, and there was no more printing going on. Yeah, just individual mutts started, they all fragmented and started doing their own thing. So Prabhupada was determined that even if, God forbid, but if anything should happen to ISKCON, at least it'd be this publishing house to keep publishing Krishna's message. And in that way, hopefully, yes, the mission could be revived. Now, there was this poison that had entered. Some of the leaders had been getting this minimized, compromised view of Prabhupada. So, and this was manifesting in different ways. Like when I joined in 1970 in July, there was something already there publishing. It was before the BBT. And it went for a few years. The BBT was established in 1970 July, but it really didn't do anything until 72. I think May 72 it actually started doing something. But when I joined in Boston, there was already a press. It was called ISKCON Press. You ever seen any books with that name on it? Yeah, that's way a long time ago. And yeah, they were coming out with the second canto of the Bhagavatam, because Prabhupada had brought the first canto over. So they were coming out with the second canto. And they were coming out with it in chapters. They didn't publish whole books, just small paperback chapters. The Lord in the Heart, Purusha Sukta confirmed, the Bhagavatam is the answer. And then every time they come out with the chapter, they'd give the chapter, they'd offer it on the altar, and they'd give it to Prabhupada. So, on this one chapter, Brahmananda Prabhu, who was the head of the press, Brahmananda Swami, he'd taken sannyas, he handed the book to Prabhupada. And Prabhupada looks at the cover, and on the cover, to identify the author, it says, A.C. Bhaktivedanta. No Swami, no Prabhupada, no founder Acharya. It's practically stripped of all its spiritual significance, his name. Prabhupada opens the book, the binding snaps, and the pages go flying all over the place, because the binding was really cheap. I was living in the cellar of the Boston Temple where the bindery was, and they were binding the books by gluing them. They just glued them, and then they stacked them, and then by force of gravity the glue would set. It was very amateur kind of operation. And things would happen, you know. When Prabhupada was in the LA temple, and he was taking Charnamrit one morning, and he noticed when he sipped the Charnamrit that it was salty. And so Prabhupada said, "Who has done this?" And the girl offering him Charnamrit, she didn't know, and she just started giggling. You know, and so Prabhupada said, "Get someone responsible." Bad sign. And other little things, you know, people, they were neglecting services and neglecting. And then finally when the BBT got a building, the BBT got up and running, got a building, there was nothing on the building identifying what the building was. No BBT, no founder Acharya. And the temple presidents were writing Prabhupada letters on their own personal stationery. And Prabhupada would write them back, answers to their questions, and then he would say, "By the way, when you write me a letter, you should write on temple stationery, and the temple should be identified as of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, founder Acharya, His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, by the way." So, and then one fine day in 1973, one temple president, without anybody knowing it, sold the temple, took the money, and ran. Left everybody stranded. Because the temple wasn't even in ISKCON's name, it was in his name. So after that happened, in 1974, on July 22, 1974, this is 4 years later after that first legal document forming the GBC, Srila Prabhupada drafted an amendment to his earlier management document reasserting his supreme position in ISKCON. Mataji, read that.
It's declared that His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada is the founder Acharya of ISKCON, International Society for Krishna Consciousness. He is the supreme authority in all matters of the society. His position cannot be occupied by anyone else, and his name and title must appear on all documents, letterheads, publications, and buildings of the society.
And today we could add websites in the electronic age. Just for fun, I was presenting in one of our prominent temples in Europe, and I went on their homepage to see how they were presenting Prabhupada. This is a few years ago. And I couldn't find Prabhupada. on the homepage. Couldn't find him. Finally, as I was mousing around, I saw a tab that said history. Sure enough, I click on history and there's a little photo and a little blurb. I was shocked. Oh my God. I went to one of the managers. I said, Prabhu, if we think Prabhupada's history, guess what we are? We're history too. We're not going to last. We will be in the dustbin of history. Luckily, the next year I went back to the same place, and at least Prabhupada was on the homepage, because they were getting more in the mood of founder Acharya. So, now, you could take that paragraph and think, whoa, who does this Swami think he is? He thinks he's some great soul or something, you know? No, he's doing his duty. Prabhupada's doing his duty to protect ISKCON by reasserting his position. He's the leader. He's being empowered to present Krishna consciousness. His authority should not be minimized or challenged or neglected. Now, if you want to get Prabhupada's real mood, internal mood, that same summer, in summer of '74, you know what was going on? Prabhupada was translating the Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita. And that same year, 1974, even as Srila Prabhupada was reasserting his position as ISKCON's founder Acharya, while he was translating the Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, he also reasserted his and our disciplic obedience and service to his own spiritual master in the mission of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So on the next page you're going to hear Prabhupada doing this in a purport. So, Vanamali Prabhu, you want to read that?
As members of the Krishna consciousness movement, we belong to the family. Our disciplinic succession of Saraswati Goswami, and thus we are known as Saraswat. Obeisances are therefore offered to the spiritual master as Saraswata, Deva, or a member of Saraswat family.
It's like Kaunteya is called a matronym. It means it's a name derived from the mother. Kaunteya, O son of Kunti. Right? So Saraswat means that we're all disciplic descendants of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta. Keep reading.
Namaste Saraswati Devi, whose mission is to broadcast the cult of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Gauravani Pracharini, and to fight the impersonalist and voidists, Nirvishesha Sunyavadi, Paschata Desha Tarini.
Right, that's Prabhupada's pranam mantra, which he revealed as part of his program to protect ISKCON by explicitly spelling out his mission. You know the translation of Prabhupada's pranam mantra? Our respectful obeisances are unto you, O spiritual master, servant of Saraswati Goswami. You are kindly preaching of Lord Chaitanya, the mission of Lord Chaitanya in these Western countries. Now here we are in India, but India and still the world looks to the West. They copy what's going on in the West. What do they mean when they say, when you see on the buses, India is great? That means we can be just as degraded as the Westerners, right? We can have Hollywood, we'll call it Bollywood, right? Yeah, we can. It's still there. So it's still the mission is to, especially in the West, that's the strategy, because whatever the Westerners do, you know, the Easterners follow. And to fight with impersonalists, and you're revealing the message, preaching the message of Lord Chaitanya in these Western countries, so filled with impersonalism and voidism. Okay, so here's the last couple of slides of the lesson, and this is fascinating. Prabhupada, in his one and only visit to the continent of South America, Prabhupada went to the country of Venezuela, which is on the top of South America. The capital is Caracas. Prabhupada was there in February '75, and he's giving a class on Bhagavatam 111, Janmadhyasya yataha, right? Janmadhyasya yaton vayaditadatash, right? So here it is said that origin is life, because here it is said, Yatonvayad itaratascha arteshu abhigyaksvarat. He is directly and indirectly conscious of all manifestations, and he is independent. Okay, now is this on? Because we're going to hear Prabhupada give a fascinating analogy now. Just as Krishna is the origin and the life of his creation, on the other side of the analogy, I won't give it away. Let's hear what Prabhupada says, but is this on? It is. Okay, let's see.
Just like if I'm taken by the origin of this Krishna consciousness movement, that means I know everything directly and indirectly of all this movement. If I do not know directly and indirectly everything of this movement, then I cannot become the founder Acharya. And as soon as the origin becomes a knower, he is life.
Okay, as soon as the origin becomes a knower, he is life. In other words, where everything comes from in the creation is a person. And that person knows every atom of his creation. So similarly, Prabhupada, as the creator, as the origin of ISKCON, he knows what ISKCON is all about, and we have to follow his life, his teachings, his mood, his mission, to know how to stay on track and keep ISKCON going in the right direction. So, Prabhupada's uniquely empowered spirit is to be imbibed and transmitted by all generations of his followers. And now we have the final slide. It's kind of a balancer to that, because somebody might say, well, you're just focusing on Prabhupada. What about everybody else? Well, here's how we all have a part to play in that. Srila Prabhupada, our founder Acharya. As ISKCON's founder Acharya, Srila Prabhupada is the life and soul of all generations of his followers. Moreover, now here's the important, crucial balancer. Whoever enriches our foundational identity as, quote, Prabhupada Anugas, followers, is also glorious, deepening the cooperation we'll need to take Prabhupada and Lord Chaitanya's mission of Krishna consciousness to every town and village on earth. So it's never just Prabhupada. He's the main person, but you have to have everybody else in there, enriching, focusing on that foundational common identity. That's why I said, whoever does that, our Diksha, our Shiksha gurus, our superiors, they're the most important people in our lives. They're vital, they're crucial. Lesson outcomes. By the end of the lesson, students will be able to identify Puranic and Gaudiya prophecies Srila Prabhupada fulfilled, recount Lord Chaitanya's historical stage setting, both East and West, for Prabhupada to come, recount how Prabhupada went from obscurity to Swamiji, to only he, to Prabhupada, to founder Acharya, between 1965 and 1970. Recount how Srila Prabhupada formerly identified his supreme position in ISKCON, and how he was later obliged to reassert that position. Identify the position of Prabhupada and ourselves in relation to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta and Lord Chaitanya's mission. And then finally, we should be able to identify Srila Prabhupada as the life and soul of all generations of his followers, just as Krishna is the life and soul of his creation. So in ISKCON, Prabhupada's creation, Prabhupada is the life and soul. Transition. Now I can't tell you, as we speak, when or if we're going to meet again next week. I don't know what, because I just emailed the Prabhus in Dubai again. They say they want the seminar this month, but here we are at the 13th evening, Sunday, December, and I don't know if they're ready yet. They weren't, they were supposed to be ready as of tomorrow, but obviously they're not, because they haven't even bought the ticket yet. So I don't know how many more days in December I'll be in Mira Road. So I'll just have to, when I see Kamala Lochan Prabhu tomorrow, I'll have to ask him, Do you want me to continue? If I do continue tomorrow night, do you want to come? Yeah? Or can you come? Or, I mean, I know you're going to be polite and say yes, but maybe you're too busy. I don't know. You could. Okay, you could come. You? Yeah? You want to come? Yeah? All right. Prabhu, yeah. All right, let me tell Kamalochan Prabhu we at least have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people. I'm 7. I'm coming. And if you want me to continue, I'll be happy to keep, rehearsing for January when hopefully we'll have a bigger venue. And people will be more free because it won't be the marathon. So just, why don't we say, okay, we'll do it. I mean, we all want to come, so let's just come. And I'll just tell Kamalochan that I'll let him know whenever Dubai, when we're going to stop it. Maybe we'll do it right through next weekend. I don't know. That probably means I won't go to Dubai. But they say they want it. Okay, so having deepened our understanding of Srila Prabhupada's relationship with all of us as our founder Acharya, and what is that called? This is the last lesson of what section of the seminar? Do you remember how it flows? What's the first section called? Sambandha. Sambandha. Yeah, the first lesson was the spiritual masters. Then it was Founder Acharya principle. And tonight was Srila Prabhupada, our Founder Acharya. All right? So the next lesson, you see a different color scheme now. It's more pink. It's the first lesson of Abhideya. Once we understand more how Prabhupada is our foundational guru, then we're inspired to commit more to his mission. So this whole lesson is all about Prabhupada's, the roots of his ISKCON mission, beginning from the moment he met Srila Bhaktisiddhanta until the moment he stepped on that ship, the Jaladuta, to come. It's one of my favorite lessons. It's very dramatic, and it ends in a beautiful way, too. So, it's kind of late, but does anybody have any questions? Okay. Oh. Yes, Manaji.
We just saw a little earlier that in 1965, the Roman Catholic Church had become a little liberal, accepting that other faiths could also lead to God. And what made them conclude that? Out of the blues, or what's the background to that?
Good question. Did you understand the question? Well, like with anything else, it was a long time coming. I mean, they were specifically interested in sort of relaxing the tensions between themselves and Judaism. There was a lot of tension there. And that continues to this day. Well, for one thing, they were losing a lot of members because as people naturally become more educated and they meet different kinds of people, they see that, well, this is a godly person, but he's not a Roman Catholic like me. So they begin to think, how can it be that he's going to hell? He's so devout, in his own faith. So it's just a matter of people sort of growing up, really. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur said the biggest enemies in Kali Yuga are sectarianism and party feeling. So it's an immaturity, it's an insecurity when to make myself, feel good, I have to put down others, And people tend to fear what they don't understand. The Christianity, it became, it went from a cult to a religion, basically, when the leader of the Romans, his name was Constantine in the 4th century, he decided to adopt Christianity as the official religion of the Roman Empire. He saw that it was kind of popular, so he thought, well, maybe this would be a good move politically if we just made it the official religion. So anyway, yeah, it's the 20th century, and people were becoming more educated, and And the church, you know, has had its problems, as the church continues to have its problems with all the, you know, the child abuse going on and the scandals. So Pope John saw that the church was in trouble and they really needed to become more engaged with the world and not just, you know, be so insular and say that we're the only way and you guys are all going to hell, when their own house is kind of, you know, they have so many faults in their own house. So they did that, and interestingly enough, they did that, but then the next pope, not the next pope, but the pope after him in 1968, I forget his name, but he took it back. He went back on that, and he said, no, we're the only way. So he said it, he again made it very sectarian. But Francis is just, you know, he's the opposite of that. I mean, he's way left of that. It's kind of the natural consequence of education, you know. It's like if you read Prabhupada's Gita as it is, chapter 4, text 7, yada yada hi dharmasya. Krishna is revealing, you know, when he comes, whenever and wherever there is a decline in religious practice and a predominant rise of irreligion, at that time I descend myself. Well, if you remember the purport to that verse, Prabhupada, in a very non-sectarian way, starts talking about how Krishna comes at different times, and he doesn't just come to India. You know, he starts mentioning he mentions Christ, and, you know, sometimes he comes personally, or he sends his servant or his messenger, which is an indirect reference to, you know, Muhammad. So Krishna is always coming. Avatara hi sankhyaya, it says in 1.3, third chapter of the Bhagavatam, first canto. Avatara, that the incarnations of the Lord are as uncountable as the waves of the ocean. Hyasankhya, asankhya, you can't count them, you can't sankhya. You can't count them. I don't really know so much the history, but I know that those are broadly the circumstances under which Pope John the 23rd decided to call this council, you know, because they were hurting.
Or were they afraid? You know, a lot of people became irreligious. They lost faith in that religion. So is that why they took this leap?
Well, they just wanted to be more, they didn't want to be so isolated. You know, if you say you're the only way, then you really isolate yourself.
But
yeah.
Vaishnavas say that too. So are we not called orthodox?
No, we don't say that.
Because our scriptures say that there are false religions, like for example Jainism, and people following that go to hell. So is that also not orthodox?
Well, yeah, and Mahaprabhu also said, Nasteva, 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 only by chanting Hare Krishna. But what did he also say? You say it every morning. Nam Namakari Bahuda Nijasarva Shaktis. There's many names of God. And you'll see in Prabhupada's Vani, in his teachings, you'll see very broad statements, and you'll see very strict statements. And what did Bhaktivinoda Thakur say? Whenever I see my Lord, he called Lord Chaitanya his Eastern Savior, because he was raised Christian. He was raised in British education and Christianity until he discovered Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita. So he was the perfect bridge preacher. He knew the Western, and then he got the Eastern. He said, whenever I see my Lord, he says, whenever I see people worshiping, you know, in churches and mosques, I see how my Lord is being worshipped in a different way. So we're not sectarian. Although, you know, if you look at statements talk about sectarian sounding, statements by Krishnadas Kaviraj saying, anyone who doesn't accept Lord Chaitanya as the Supreme Personality of Godhead is a demon. Right? So there, you know, by that yardstick, by that measure, you know, people in other sampradayas, Vaishnava sampradayas, could be called demons if they don't recognize Lord Chaitanya. So you have to be balanced in your hearing, or else you can come off as fanatic and sectarian. It's good. You know, we have a whole division of ISKCON that we dialogue with other faith traditions. And it's good, because if you notice, take it on a very personal level. Okay, it's the book marathon. So if you're out there distributing books, if you're not a good listener, of course maybe this doesn't happen so much on book distribution, because book distribution we're not supposed to spend so much time with one person. But say you're cultivating a person. If you cultivate a person and you're spending time, you have to be a good listener. Because if you're willing to listen to them, then they'll be willing to listen to you. But if it's all just you know, blowing them down with philosophy and not listening to what they have to say, they're going to just say, well, this is not a conversation, and it's just me listening to this person. I tell the story of did you bring it up? Oh, you brought it up, Vanamali Prabhu, of Prabhupada showing the example of how to preach to people by preaching to the people in Detroit, the auto aristocracy. Yeah.
Last time you gave this.
Yeah. So in the Detroit temple, Detroit, Michigan is the car capital of the world, or at least of America. Used to be the world. You know, that's where Henry Ford's from. So he invented, he didn't invent the automobile, but he invented the mass production of the automobile. He made it available. So when they opened up the new Detroit temple in 1975, it used to be belonging to one of the auto aristocrats, Lawrence P. Fisher. So Ambarish Prabhu, who's from Detroit, you know, Alfred Brush Ford, the great-grandson of Henry Ford. And then my god-sister Lekha Shravanti Mataji, who was the daughter of another famous auto person, who's the daughter of the United Auto Workers labor leader. He was the leader of the workers. So when they both joined Prabhupada's movement, it was big news in Detroit, because the daughter of the labor leader joined, and the great-grandson of Henry Ford, the big capitalist, the big manager, he joined. And so labor and management are joining the same movement. You know, usually they're bitter enemies on either side of the negotiating table, right? So it's big news how they could join the same movement. A great example of how Krishna consciousness harmonizes all differences, right? So when the grand opening happened, Prabhupada was there, and Ford and Ruther, you know, the daughter and the son, these big people, they invited all the auto industry aristocrats, people that would never get within 100 miles of a Hare Krishna temple. They think it's weird, it's a cult, or it's strange, especially back in the 1970s in America. So they all come, you know, in their tuxedos and big gowns, you know, the ladies in their big lace gowns and big fancy hair. And so they want to meet the Hare Krishna leader. It was kind of like some fun thing to do, you know. Let's see what the Krishnas have done with Larry Fisher's old mansion, you know. It's a big, which he spent $1 million US in the 1920s to build. It's extravagant. Prabhupada got the real estate down to $300,000 cash in 1975. And then Prabhupada confided to the devotees, every room was worth the price. Because Larry Fisher, to build this thing, he imported the finest materials from all over the world. You know, for each room, it was a special room. You know, it was just outrageous. So, when Prabhupada sealed the deal, Prabhupada said 300,000 cash. Now, first he said, so we are poor, I am a poor monk, you should donate this. He said to the real estate agent. And the lady practically fell off her chair, you know. You don't say that. I mean, you just don't say things like that. He can't say that, you know. She practically died on the spot. And Prabhupada, you know, that's all right, you know. So he got down to 300,000 cash, and he didn't have $300,000. So later, they accepted it, because it had been neglected and abandoned for years. It wasn't moving on the market, so they just let it go for 300,000. So Prabhupada approaches his disciple Ambarish, so you can help. So he puts up half, and then Lekha Shivanti puts up half, and then they had it. And then at the grand opening, they all come in and they want to meet the head Hare Krishna. So there's Prabhupada, he's there. You know. And there's even pictures of this and recordings. And Prabhupada's there sitting behind his desk, you know, just the way he always is. And they have chairs there, nice chairs, but they all, some of them sit on the floor, you know, cross-legged. Indian style, right? And so how does Prabhupada talk to these people? What's he going to say, you know, to these people? They don't know anything, and they're all big-time exploiters. They're making their fortune off, you know, cheating people, basically, overcharging them, because they build the cars to break. They call it planned obsolescence. So they have to buy a new car every few years because they just, you know. So how does Prabhupada put them at ease? He starts talking about the car he had when he was working for Dr. Bose's labs, Bengal Chemical, in the 1920s. He had a car. He didn't drive it, but his servant, his assistant, drove it. So then Prabhupada is describing what would go wrong with the car. You know, the steerings. Sometimes the steering would go wrong, sometimes the brakes, sometimes the carburetor or the bearings. And every time Prabhupada describing it, they know the cars, so they start laughing, you know. Yeah, we know how to, yeah, that's right, that's right. So Prabhupada had them in the palm of his hand. For 20 minutes he's talking about old cars, right? And then finally, at the right moment, he says, so, the body is like a car. And he starts doing the whole Upanishad, you know, metaphor. The horses, or the horsepower now, is like the senses. The reins, or the driving wheel, steering wheel, is like the mind. The driver's like the intelligence, and the passenger's like the soul. So they got it. There's a difference between, just as there's a difference between the passenger and the car, there's a difference between the soul and the body. Brilliant. Because he had the compassion, he had the patience to go right where they were, lead them by the hand, to the first point in Krishna consciousness. We're not the body, we're soul. So that's what we have to do. So Prabhupada is willing to, you know, meet them on their terms. So when we preach to people, we have to be interested in them, so that they'll be interested in what we have to say. It's not just, you know, beating them over the head with philosophy. Okay, it's after 9. I guess we better end it, unless you have a burning question. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Hari Bol.